If you're ready to stop building someone else's dream and start creating your own, join our free community, the Self-Directed Network, at acesmanagementinc.com/school. It's where people leaving their W-2s come together to build freedom, purpose, and momentum toward what's next. Welcome to Life After W-2. I'm your host, John Chan. After 17 years in corporate America, I made the leap to build my own business. It was messier than I thought it would be, but also full of valuable lessons I didn't know I needed. This show is about sharing shifts in mindset, pivots in strategy, and personal changes that come with pursuing financial freedom. You're not alone in this. We're all figuring it out, one step at a time. Welcome to Life After W-2. Today's episode features Olivia Atkin and her journey from W-2 life to full-time entrepreneurship. She opens up about navigating corporate culture, facing gender bias, and how networking reshaped her path during COVID. Olivia breaks down the mindset shifts that came with launching her podcast, building her business, and redefining what success really means. If you're stuck between corporate comfort and entrepreneurial curiosity, this conversation will move you forward. Let's get started. Olivia, welcome.
Thank you for having me on. I'm so excited to be talking to you today about my journey.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear about your transition from W-2 life into your own business. So tell us a little bit about what your W-2 life was like.
So my W-2 life, I say I kind of had two different W-2 lives, right?
Right.
I worked in professional sports before going and working in a traditional corporate setting. Obviously, professional sports has its own W-2 environment and life and community in itself that is very much different than the traditional corporate life you go into. For me, transitioning from working at the New York Giants and managing pro athletes on also a personal side of things, transitioned in 2019 when I decided to go back to school, that I'd accomplished and achieved what I identified and so many individuals identified as success in professional sports. And I knew my own ceiling was kind of met, and I wanted that next challenge. So in 2019, I decided to go back to school and get my MBA. I did a 2-year MBA program in 2 semesters, which was a feat of its own. Many people looked at me like I had 20,000 heads. For me, I went back to my alma mater where I was very involved in undergrad. And the second I called them, they took me on the spot. And then the second they're like, well, how quickly do you want to do this? And I was like, wait, you're asking me, like, how quickly can I do this?
Hmm.
And I had built personal relationships with different people at the university. So they knew the kind of student I was and what I'd been involved in undergrad, and still completing a degree and 2 minors all in separate schools in 3.5 years. And so they're like, well, we've never had anyone do it, but theoretically you could do it in 2 semesters. And I was like, challenge accepted. I will be that person. And beneficial for me as well is that spring semester was spring of 2020, which we all know, life, business, everything we knew of everything came to a complete stop and sports kind of disappeared. So for me, it was a time to finish my degree and look at what that future held. And I was very thankful as well because I wouldn't really have a job regardless of the fact. So it was proactive. And so when I was getting my MBA, I really loved supply chain. I put a name to what I had always kind of been doing behind the scenes and not understanding there's a complete industry and job title. And I had started the Association for Supply Chain Management at my university, got involved with the state chapter, and really was networking. So it was time to graduate and look for jobs. Again, it was COVID. Networking was really all I could do, and not many people were taking new employees. It was actually the opposite was happening. There was either a freeze and people were being like that. But I networked with people who were involved with Lockheed Martin, and I really built relationships with those individuals. And I was telling them I was looking, and they were like, hey, there's this individual, Stephanie, who's the VP of all of the Northeast for the supply chain area of the business. You should talk to her. And I spoke to her. Long story short, by the end of the conversation, she was like, let me pass your resume along. Pretty soon, we're going to start hiring more entry level people. So let me send it along. I ended up getting hired by Lockheed Martin in their Sikorsky division as a master scheduler for all the helicopters we make. So I oversaw the production of the helicopters we make around the world. And it was very rewarding in the beginning. It was very exciting, right? However, for me, I had an internal conflict and an external conflict with my boss. The team for 15 plus years was himself and just him. So now it's this person who's been with the company for 31 and years. His plan was a year after I was hired to leave and retire. So he's very much out. You're now adding a layer of COVID into it. So everything's remote. He has no training materials to teach how to do any role and like every pass because he'd been doing it himself for so long. And now you're adding like he has to show me that through Zoom.
Sure, he was.
Yeah, he really was thrilled with all of those layers that got added. And so my conflict and experience, because I worked on that team with him for a total of 2 years, and quickly after he left, I kind of broke down and was like, I need to leave this department because not that they necessarily agreed with Lockheed Martin's perspective of how employees should be treated, but to give a perspective of the pressures that were added and things like this. One time there was an issue that occurred in the planning by a different department. They were doing stuff. There was an oversight on our team and we were problem solving. And at this point, it was towards the end of his tenure. So we did consultant on our team, myself, him, and the person who was going to be replacing him. And I'm the only female on the team. And we're going over and we're staying in this cubicle because as his tenure ended, even though we were still in the midst of COVID, he figured out a way to get us all into the office, even though no one else was there. And so we're in this cubicle and I'm on one kitty corner and he's on the other and everyone's tense about the situation. And I just turn my chair around and I offer, hey, could this potentially work? And he turns around and looks at me and smiles and goes, and just laughs. And it's like, Olivia, I will never take advice from a woman. And the only woman I will listen to is Stephanie because she's my boss's boss and ultimately pays my check. But no other woman I will ever listen to. And I was like, and that's just the example of what my everyday experience was like working with him, which really shaped my perspective of what corporate was and how amazing it could sound like on the outside, but how damaging as a culture it could be and how damaging internal morale wise it can be. And in that moment, I just looked at him and I laughed because from my sports background, like I worked in male locker rooms, right? Like I worked in sports. So I had a pretty thick skin because I also worked in professional sports in a time that women weren't really in professional sports. And I just said to him, I was like, you should be really lucky that I have thick skin. And that does not really bother me. Your opinion of me does not bother me. What needs to matter is the task at hand. And I turned around and kept doing my job. The thing I did afterwards, when internally in my head, I was like, I'm going to outlast you. So even if it's by one day, I'm not going to let you win this battle on how you treated me. I'm going to outlast you. And then I'll switch teams because obviously people don't realize what's going on here. And like, it's been draining. But what I did the next day was I took the boss I was going to be having into a room. And I looked at him and I said, why didn't you say anything? He goes, well, he's the boss. Like he's still training. I go, no, he put me in charge of training you. I've been training you. But also you set the tone to our consultant and to me that behavior is okay. And at the end of the day, you're creating that culture. And so it was kind of at that time that I had already had thoughts about, wow, there's such a gap of what working in corporate can be versus the reward that does not get talked about. When I ended up leaving that department, I went on to work at a different location and work on our naval contracts. And working there, I had a different experience where it was everyone was kind of competing to get the recognition. To me, we should all be a team. Now it was a different culture, but the culture was who can I kind of put above or say, I did this to get recognition from the higher up. And to me, that's not a culture I want to be a part of. So during that time, I had launched my podcast and my business. And my business wasn't really like, hey, I'm going to do this side hustle and make extra money. It was around the fact that I'd already published a book on career development that gets used in high schools and colleges. I wanted to continue to make an impact through my voice, sharing my experiences of working in professional sports, the conversations I've had, this and that, and bring people in to really pull back the curtain on what life and professional journeys and what shape us could all be, so no one feels like they're alone. And that, listen, you're not. We all go through these things, even if they're not talked about as much. And so I'd started that podcast, and was starting that, I launched my business. And what I started to realize was within the first 30 days, the podcast was in 8 countries completely organically. Throughout the day, I just wanted to see my stats. If someone would email me, I'd be like, I just want to end work so I can respond to this email and like talk to this person, be so interesting. And I started getting emails about the impact the podcast was making on different individuals' lives, how it resonated with them, even if the topic wasn't, the same exact experience they had. And I just wanted more and more of that and helping people in that way and making sure that everyone's voices were heard. And through that process, people started coming to me about, hey, how can I be a guest on the podcast? How can I start my own podcast? How can I grow this? Because like no one's really listening to it. And I'd get really excited to help them. And so I was like, oh, here's the consulting I'm going to be doing. And I just loved every second of it. Now, if you had asked me, and back then people did, are you going to leave corporate to do this? The idealism of what success looks like was like, no, like I'm working at this company, I'm going to continue to grow up the ladder and this and that. What pushed me to leave was actually the mass layoffs that happened in 2022. I was told that I was safe. Our department was actually getting more business. We had more naval contracts coming in. I was the only one handling 16 of them. So they're like, hey, you're about to get more, so you're good. And we were supposed to know by end of February, anyone who was part of the mass layoffs. And in March, the first week of March, we all have our pay review, performance review, because we get our bonuses and everything that Thursday or Friday in our check. I show up to a Tuesday afternoon at 4:00 for my performance review. And my boss goes, hey, Olivia, so you know those mass layoffs? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, so I'm sad to tell you, but you're part of them. And I was like, wait, what? And he was like, yeah, you make too much money, so you're part of the mass layoffs. And I was in shock and I was angry. And I was like, whoa, like I've given so many hours to this company. I've given so much of myself to this company. And later that day, I had a podcast recording. And I get on the recording and the guest starts to go into their professional journey. And the conversation goes, and I end up saying that I was just part of the mass layoffs that happened. So I understand that feeling. And it shocked my guest that I actually admitted it. My producers on the other end were like, we were not expecting that. And I was just like, yeah. And now I have to figure out what I'm going to do next. And that is when, after taking 48 hours to think about it, I was like, I'm leaning into my business. I'm passionate about it, this and that. And it's really what drove me to be all in, because I don't know if I would have pivoted that quickly. I think it would have ultimately happened, but I needed that push out of corporate and the idealism that like to be successful, you have to climb that corporate ladder to really lean into all the benefits and really be happy.
Right. Okay. So you had a long career with the Giants. Were you there for the Super Bowl years?
No, I was not.
Then, I mean, you had a long career, and then you end up getting laid off, and you just at that point you make that decision. This is what I'm going to do. I mean, going from corporate to now running your own business, like, what was one of the biggest struggles you had to go through, like mindset wise?
So there were a few. I will also add this verbiage. Like, I think, and I still have conversations around this to this day. Look at the benefits you have if you're in corporate. Because one thing I did for the 3 years I was there was I understand how vacation time would roll over, but my sick days wouldn't, right? And I leveraged all that. So when I went to leave, I got a very big severance package because state law, they weren't going to pay me for my sick days and the new year had just hit. So I could take days off before my last day, but all of the vacation days I'd accrued and like just didn't use because they would roll over, I took with me. So in addition to the 4-month pay leave that they gave me, I got an additional 2.5 months because of what my salary would be since pay raise hit. I worked till the end of March and my pay was my new pay raise. My benefits were on that new pay raise. So I
Right.
always say leverage that. And that helped me double down initially on like, hey, I have 6.5 months of pay. I'm going to try this for 4 months. If I don't sign a client and make money in 4 months, I'm not saying make my Lockheed Martin salary and be at a point where that's coming through. But if I don't bring in $1 in 4 months, then I will start having feelers out and get that next job. And a lot of people were like, why are you going to wait that long, right? We're in a period of mass layoffs across the board. Like, what are you doing? And I was like, I believe enough in myself to be realistic about a timeline, but also put the cards in my favor. Because I knew, just like so many of us do, that if you're half in and half out,
Yeah.
time is going in different directions. So you can't be all in on one thing. Like time wise, it won't, mental wise, it won't be it. The challenges I had growing was I'd worked for a very long time. You get used to the guaranteed paycheck that comes in. Like push comes to shove, even if you take a vacation, days off, you're getting paid for those days. Being an entrepreneur, no money is guaranteed money. Till I, to this day, tell people, I'm like, oh yeah, I just talked to this client, like they're going to sign. And I say to them, are they? And they're like, what do you mean? They said yes. I'm like, when the money hits the account, that's when they're a client. Because that money is not guaranteed money until it hits my account. So they could say yes all they want. And I've lost many people over the growth of my business who've committed to saying, yes, I'm all in. And then 4 days later, I'm like, hey, you haven't paid. Oh, this happened in life, or this person told me I shouldn't be doing this right now. And so there's all those extra factors where you can lose a sale. And that money you were like thinking in your head you were going to get no longer is money. So that I think is a very big thing you have to get comfortable with
Mhm.
mentally, is that like every month's going to look different, especially in the first few years of your business. I've had high highs and low lows. I remember my boyfriend is a chief in the US Coast Guard. When we relocated to where he's currently serving, which is, Alaska, my business was growing every month right before we left. And I was so confident that taking those 30 days off to relocate, because we road tripped here, would not affect my business at all.
Yes.
Everyone else was like, are you sure? And I'm like, no, we're growing. We're hitting numbers every single month. Like I told all my clients, everyone was okay with it. What I quickly realized when we got here and I evaluated things, because I'm like, people aren't signing. What's going on? Nothing's changed. Yeah, the business was doing really well, but I was having all these calls. And when I deep dive into it, it took people 2 to 4 weeks to sign with me after a call. Well, I had no people for the last 30 days. So that timeline is now kind of doubled because no one's on my calendar. Because I've been off. We weren't having conversations about getting on my calendar. I had no one on my calendar. Now was a time where financially the money dipped and I had to really evaluate and grow. And I think another mindset shift that a lot of people have to understand is going to be part of the journey is entrepreneurship, no matter what you do, will show you the best and worst versions of yourself. What are the things you're really good at and can stay focused on? And what are the things that you struggle with? And how do you react when you're struggling in those?
Yeah, I really like that because, I mean, I'm going through it where I was working consulting and accounting. I never did any marketing, but now this is all I do. Social media is something I really avoided, but now it's all I do. Podcasting, conversations, recorded conversations, something I avoided, but now it's all I ever do. It really forces you to grow. And I went through something like that where, business was going well and then all of a sudden it dried up for a while. And then that is when you really grow. I mean, I feel like it's when you grow the most, honestly.
Yep. And for me too, like one of the things for me when the business took off, which it started to do in those first initial 4 months, I had signed a few clients, but originally my consulting was career development consulting because I had a book out on it. I'd already been doing some talks on it before even, left corporate or got into corporate. And so for me, it was like, obviously, this is what I'm going to do in consulting. But when people started asking me about podcasting, like, how do I grow my podcast? How can I be on podcast? All these stuff. And I had all this information that to me was so like common sense. But what I learned speaking to this day, to hosts, to people who want to be on podcasts, even if they don't have them, is that the industry, as time has moved on, has gotten more noisy and noisy. And the data and information that could really help is becoming more scarcity and scarce more and more. And there's people that are leveraging knowledge not for the right reasons. And it's hard. And so for me, I was like, oh, wait, I always say, like, what's your zone of genius? For me, having a degree or certification in every business area, being able to talk to people from many different walks of life on many different topics and play back to like the impact and, what podcasting is and being able to explain it in different ways is what is my superpower. Building relationships is my superpower, but podcasting is my zone of genius. I can look at a podcast and very quickly know what's working well and what's not working well, what needs to be improved. If you're going to be a guest, what's your avenue to go down? And so for me, it was leaning into that. But because of having that knowledge and being able to see that, when I pivoted to podcast consulting a few months after I launched the business, luckily for me, it only took a few months for me to be like, hey, this is what people keep asking me for. This needs to be an offer. And then it took over what my offering was. But everything was referral based almost after the first 4 clients I got, which were organic, like having conversations and networking with people. They liked the service. They would talk to someone, they'd refer a client. And so I was proud of the fact that my book was all referral based, right? It's like, I don't need to do sales. And I'd also say for a long time, I'm not a salesperson. I'm not good at sales. It's not in my zone of genius. It's not in what I like doing. It made me uncomfortable. And as an entrepreneur, like you just mentioned, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, not only to grow your business, but to grow yourself. And so in the overall achieving success business growth, one thing I had to lean into and like recognize was like, I can't just lean into referrals. And as I grew and the people I was helping grew, those referrals I were getting was not as much in alignment to where the business is going versus like who those individuals were. So now the referrals don't even align anyway. So what are you going to do? You got to get real good at sales and you got to get fast. And at first I'd kind of make an excuse. I recently did a post about this of like, you can wait into that New Year's resolution, but what happens in Q2 when you made that resolution and then life gets in the way? And it's very easy to like make excuses. And that's what I kind of did. I was like, oh, I'm getting some business. But again, you've ups and you've downs. And downs hit, sometimes they hit. And it's like, do a self-reflection. What is the missing piece? And for me, that was sales. And I just learned everything I could because If you ignore that piece, whether it's due to fear or uncomfortability, over time, it's going to build that bigger and bigger hole. You're going to get more fearful and you're going to get more uncomfortable, but it's going to affect your business.
Right. It's easy to work with people that are warm leads, but then when they come in cold and you're trying to expand, it's like a different ball game. They have to somehow get comfortable with you. Well, just out of curiosity, so when you're working at Lockheed Martin, how long were you doing both?
I'm doing the math in my head quickly. About 8 months. So I had I'd started researching and building and deep diving into everything I could find on podcasting, informational interviews, talking to people from all aspects of the industry in the beginning of September. And then November 1st, so 2 months later, is when we launched the podcast. I launched the podcast and the business. And then my official end date of Lockheed Martin was March 3rd.
Gotcha. Okay. So then, I mean, if you were happy, I mean, I guess you weren't really completely happy in your role. Like, why would you go out and do something outside of your W-2?
So for me, the podcast was a way to get back. It's the same thing I did with the book. I always tell people, never say no to an opportunity right away. And that's a motto I've lived by, right? Being the youngest intern to ever intern at the New York Giants and then staying for 8 years, getting opportunities to work with professional athletes from everything from clothing lines to New York Fashion Week to nonprofit events. When someone comes to you with an opportunity, whether it's due to fear, whether it's feeling busy, like if you're unsure about it, 'cause sometimes you're like, yes, give it to me. Always sit with it and reflect on it. And that's always a rule I've lived by, as well as like thinking about it from the perspective of 6 months from now, a year from now, 10 years from now. Am I going to ever sit back and sit in my comfy chair like I'm sitting now and be like, I wonder what could have happened if I did that? I wonder what life would be like if I went to that university or took that job or took that opportunity. And so from a very early age, and like my own medical background and being diagnosed with the rare form of epilepsy at age 9 and overcoming that, I know that tomorrow's never guaranteed and your life can shift very quickly. But I also never want to sit in a chair in those months or years later and be like, I really wonder what could have happened. So for me, when the publishing company approached me, we had conversations. And for me, it was, if I'm going to write this book, I don't care about the money I get. I want to make it affordable for the people who need it, right? Because someone who's looking for a career development textbook at college has to typically spend all this money on textbooks. And they don't find value. And this is going to be valuable, but it needs to be cost effective. If you're someone who didn't go to college but want that book, and you might be working at, Walmart, are you going to decide over a book that can help you grow or maybe groceries for the week? So let's make it affordable for you to do both so you can grow. And so they'd agreed to that. And I'd written it because I'd already had like so much information. And so for me, when the idea after the fact of the podcast came up, and then I decided not to go back and teach at that university, the university teaching was just a way to give back. And I was like, what is another way to do that? And what is a way that no matter what happens, someone can't stop my voice or me telling my story or someone else sharing their story? It's podcasting. No. And so when I started leaning into that, it was really a passion project. Like, in all complete honesty, when that September, when I started researching it, there was no LLC. There was going to be no business. It was, the book's over here. It's already done. Like, the publishing company sells it. And now I'll have this podcast. And I'll go out once a week. And it'll be fun. It wasn't until I met with my business attorney who was like, hey, do you think maybe you should have a business around this? And like cover at least your expenses? I was like, okay, that's a good idea. Like, business wise, that is a smart idea. You're not then relying on Lockheed Martin's salary and my W-2 to pay for something, a passion project, right? In my head at that time in October before we launched, it's a passion project. It was just something fun to do to make an impact in this world and make people feel like they weren't alone. What I quickly realized and got brought to the surface of once it launched and the impact it was making. Again, remember, 30 days in with only posting on social media that the episode had launched had over 300 views organically. It was in 8 countries. We were getting new countries, pretty quickly. And everyone was like, oh my God, this is happening. And it kind of had its own legs, and I'd already started the LLC. So when people were coming to me, I was like, oh, yeah, I could help you with this. It's another way to make that impact. But what it also did was really shined a light in how I was unfulfilled working in a W-2 corporate setting. It shined a light in, okay, I'm making an impact this way. I get to set, I don't want to say the rules, but like what is ethical, how I want to work in an environment. I can't do that here. And it shined a light on all these things where, again, the mass layoffs was the ultimate reason that made me go, but it was the push I needed. Like, I look back on that time a lot, and I always say it's at some point I would have left. Probably was going to be 3+ years in all reality, because I keep making excuses. Because again, when we look at society overall success, working in a corporate job and climbing the ladder, which I've been doing, is what so many of us used to identify as success and what that can look like. But there was just a bigger calling for me. There was just, I knew. And yeah.
Yeah. I think the excuse part is so true. It's one of these things where the office is not really known for dropping like professional development gems, but
Mhm.
is one where I think Jenna was thinking about going to art school, wanting to go to art school, and I forget the executive who came in and just said like, "There's always going to be excuse not to do something, and you just have to essentially saying you just have to do it. If you want to do something, you just have to find a way to do it, make it
Well,
happen."
and I also say, right, when I have a client who's like, I don't know, maybe come the new year or next quarter, right? I'm
Yeah.
like, you're making a decision. And they're like, I'm not making a decision. I'm like, no decision is a decision. So what is, and you already know the results. Like, a lot of times we forget whether, my TED talk that I did is on the topic of defeating your biggest enemy, you, and how we can all get in our own ways moments of opportunity of struggle. So many times people let fear or the unknown stand in the way of feeling like they can take action. But you know where you are today. You know by not doing anything, you're going to be in the same spot tomorrow. And so you already know what that result looks like. So what's going to be the result of trying it? Whether it's a new offering in your business, whether it's leaving corporate, whether it's, whatever it might be. But also, like, I'm not sitting here and also saying like, hey, leave your corporate job today and start your own business tomorrow. Like, I was doing both for a while. I think it can, if you look at your financial standing and you want to try something, because you're working in corporate, that doesn't mean it has to stop you. But it also doesn't mean you need to quit your job tomorrow and then try to be in this like whirlwind of the unknown of starting a business and trying to make money. Do what I did. Start it off, see how it lands, see how, build it, and then leave once you feel like the growth is happening. Now, again, don't wait like 5 years like I probably would have, but do it where it makes sense for you.
Yeah, I like that you bring up the New Year's resolutions because I think they fail so often because you're making an excuse. I'm not going to start now. I'm going to start when I guess on a specific date, but you really don't want to do it. Like you're
Mhm.
not pushing yourself. And yeah, if you're not willing to start today, and you're right, don't leave your corporate gig if you're getting all the bills paid, right? Yeah, it's fine, but do something. Start today. Starting today doesn't mean changing your life, but just do something to move it forward. Every single day, just do something to move it forward.
Mhm.
Well, Olivia, it's been so great to have you on. Just knowing what you know now, what's some advice you'd give to yourself, I guess, after the mass layoff?
I would give myself a few different pieces of advice. The first one would be lean into learning everything you can about sales, like right away. I think, being 4 years into the business and waiting till I was 3.5 years in to really hone my sales skills, the one area I knew from day one was not something I was good at in any means hurt me long term. I don't think it detrimentally hurt because I was getting referrals, but I think it was something, if I had evaluated earlier, the growth could have been faster. I think the other piece of advice I'd give myself is understand your value and understand your time and be present in that time. For so long from working in professional sports, when you're working in season 7 days a week, 12 plus hours a day, then going to corporate, where at Lockheed you're doing 4 10s. And I say that with parentheses because you're expected to do more than your 10 hours. When I started my business, I was like, oh, I can handle long days. I've been doing it for so long. I'm getting a business off the ground. Of course. And I've worked with a badge of honor. And it took me a while to really identify that, yeah, I could do it, but do I want to do that long term? Do I want to be working the 10, 12 hours in my business? And I'm also a part of a few new nonprofits, so that would add to my day, but really evaluating how is my day set up? Is it optimized? I remember a handful, a year and a half ago, I started talking to some people and networking with some people, and they'd be like, yeah, I work 4 hours a day. And I'm like, you're on drugs. No, you're not. How are you having a successful business working 4 hours a day, 5 days a week? And I was like, you're lying. Come on now. You're growing, you're making these numbers. How are you doing that? There's no secret sauce here. And when I started evaluating how I was allowing people on my calendar whenever they wanted to be put on my calendar, and whoever wanted to be put on my calendar. And then half the day was no shows. And I'd be doing work in between, in a 45-minute, 30-minute, an hour meeting. And I'd wait on a call for 10 minutes and you no show. Now I got 20 minutes. Now I'm really good at optimizing my time. So for me, I'm still able to get a lot of work done. But I last November, my boyfriend said something to me where I was like, oh, that's clever. We were having a discussion and we're talking about business and growth and all that. And he goes, well, what does success look like to you? I was like, you fucker. I was like, that's what I ask everyone else. And you're trying to ask me that question? Come on now. And me being me, I was like, honestly, it's working the 4 to 6 hours a day, not working long days. What do I want my life to look like 10 years from now? 5 kids 10 years from now, am I going to be happy missing out on things because I built a business where I need to show up in those 10-hour days? And fast forward, I was like, yeah, that and making the money goal and making the impact, those 3 pillars. That's what I want to do. And that's where I want to get. We ended up that was in November, and in June, rescuing a dog who's now over a year, and he was beaten, starved, and left to die, and in a hoarding situation. So there were 71 other dogs that was part of that situation. And we rescued this dog that was very unexpected. And I'd already just taken 2 weeks off because his family had been visiting. We rescued this dog. He's getting underway that Monday. And I'd already been like, oh, I'm front loading work because I just missed some time and this and that. And I was like, oh, this dog needs my time. Oh, okay. And I pushed myself in that moment to be like, can I work 4 to 6 hours a day most days? And I just started looking at what I had to do and being like, hey, in this crunch period, I'm really good with doing my tasks. So I'm going to make sure all the tasks are on my planner, which most of them always were. And I'm going to look at it, and I know how much time everything takes. And I'm just going to, no checking my phone, right? A lot of us, we get text messages or things, and we're like, oh, let me just take a minute, see what pops up. I'm like, nope, they will wait the 2-3 hours and set it aside. And I got through everything that I would get done in a 5-hour day. I got done in 2 because I kind of eliminated that noise. And now I was like, okay, does everyone need time on my calendar? The answer was no, because not everyone actually wanted my time. So that now has allowed me to work a 4 to 8 hour day, 4 days a week. Same tasks, same work, actually better work for my clients because I'm fully tuned in. But I think understanding that how you're managing your time and showing up, because what that has also done personally, now everything for the business is done in that time frame. I'm not leaving my desk and going out to dinner thinking about, oh, this still has to be done and not being present at dinner or talking about work at dinner. Now at dinner, I'm just talking about life. And so that would be, I think, the other biggest piece of advice I'd give is really look at your calendar, keep a good mental health space, and understand how you work.
Amazing. So thank you for sharing all of that. How can you help people and how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, so I help people in what I call three different buckets. I work with people to get them on top 1 to top 10% most listened to podcasts globally as a guest. I also work with individuals who want to start a podcast and get from that idea to launch. And then I work with people who have podcasts to organically grow their podcast to a top 1 to top 10% most listened to podcast globally. Every single client I've worked with has hit that mark. Is something I'm very proud of. There's been no host that I've worked with that hasn't become a top globally ranked podcast host. And then the ways you could get a hold of me are a few different. I answer every one of my emails. So you can email me at olivia.atkin@achieving-success.com. You can check out my podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts at Achieving Success with Olivia Atkin. You can also connect with me on social media, Facebook under Olivia Atkin or Achieving Success LLC. Same with LinkedIn. It's either Olivia Atkin or Achieving Success, as well as Instagram under Achieving Success LLC.
Okay, very cool. We'll make sure to have those in the description just to make life easier for everyone.
Mhm.
Olivia, thank you so much for coming on. It was great hearing your story.
It was great. And thank you so much for having me as a guest. I've truly enjoyed talking to you.
That's it for today's episode of Life After W2. I'm John Chan, and I appreciate you tuning in. If this episode resonated with you, share it with a friend who's ready to take control of their financial future. And if you're curious about how self-directed retirement accounts can unlock opportunities in alternative investing, grab our free guide. It's packed with insights to help you get started. The link's in the description. See you next time.